Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Non-Pro Show, Book Reviews. I'm James, and I'm here with Gwen.
Hi.
I don't know why I punctuated that almost as if it were a question. Gwen, you there?
Hello.
We're here to talk about A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor, the sequel to Hank Green's An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. I know one of my favorite books of 2018, and the sequel, which this is quickly following it. Gwen, what did you think of the book?
So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really interesting look at a lot of our currently pressing issues in our society, things about social media, questions about friendship, questions about humanity. I think it really digs deep into those sort of big, important ideas about what makes us worthy, what makes life worth living, and how do we do that successfully? You know? What did you think?
I liked it a lot. I don't know if I liked it as much of his first book. It's hard because the first book took me by such surprise. The only, I know the Green Brothers obviously from VidCon and from their stuff on YouTube, but obviously the only reference I have to either of their writings is John Green's writing, and he's a very different style writer. Uh, you
Definitely.
know, like like these books, I don't know if you would consider them, they're not really young adult novels. You know
No,
what I mean? Like they focus on younger characters, but not in the way John's
no.
books are. So yeah, the first one hit me by surprise. This one I came in knowing a bit more what to expect, but I still liked it. There were still a lot of surprises for me in there, even in just how he kind of changes up, the way he approaches this as compared to his first book. I think one of the things I really enjoyed so much about his first book was just how timely it felt. And I think you hit the nose on the head with this one too. It also feels very timely.
Yeah, I think that there's there's a certain struggle that I'm experiencing with media right now where I'll sit down to read something or watch something and it's hard for me to enjoy it and get into it because my brain's like, well, can't do any of that anymore. Like, oh my god, look at all those people out at a restaurant eating together. That's not that's not now. Um but this, while it's still obviously it's not written as if they're living through the COVID-19 situation that we are currently in, but there's a lot going on in here that feels eerily similar to what we're dealing with in terms of crises. Um, there's there's some climate change related disasters in the book that felt creepy, things like that.
There's quite a few stuff. I think I'm just going to warn everybody now. If for
Spoilers.
whatever reason you wanted to
Spoilers are
read this
coming.
book, yep, and you wanted it to be closely guarded its secrets. You know that Gwen and I liked it. Go read it. If you don't care or you've already read it, continue listening. Yeah, for me, it was a lot of the economic bits, right? The the struggle, the not feeling as if I really related to that general feeling, the book kind of puts off of, in a post Carl world, and I'm thinking of a post COVID world, do some of these things even seem meaningful anymore? Right?
Definitely.
Like things that we used to put so much time and effort into. Now, obviously, it's not the same as, discovering we're not alone in the universe, but, you know, staring staring death in the face still is a great way to get you very into your own mortality.
Yeah, and I think that there's something interesting about the way that we're turning to social media for all of our socializing right now. And a lot of what was fascinating about the first book was the way that social media was used to create communities that, solved the mysteries or tried to anyway of this new world that the characters were living in where there's life out there. Um, and we're trying to sort of solve the mystery of how do we function as a society when the things that we're used to don't feel safe anymore and aren't safe anymore in a lot of cases. Um, So I think that that's a really strong parallel. And I also, that like sense of despair that was captured here in terms of like the economics where people are not interested in going to work does feel similar to how people are like not able to go to work or not able to do the work they were doing before, especially when I think about entertainment industry type people. Um, if you make your living through gathering humans together, that's not really going on these days.
No, it's not. I think we texted back and forth a little bit about it when the book was going on. I was almost like, when did he finish this? Even just the choice of using, multiple times, right? Carl will list off a couple of things. It's like, you guys just don't right now have the ability or the capacity to handle like a war and a corrupt leader and a pandemic all at the same time. And I'm like, that feels really on the nose, like really,
Oh,
really on the nose.
God, I wish we were better at dealing with those things right now.
Is it that we're just us as human beings are just so predictable? Is that why this felt so timely?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there are definitely people out there who are like able to look at patterns and be like, you know what, we're due for another one. But I'm not convinced that Hank is one of them. I think he's just someone who had a really interesting story to tell that happened to have some parallels to the situation that we're in now. Um, I think that he set out to tell, a science fiction like fantasy about there being life out there. I know he's really into the whole like Mars science world. So it makes sense that his novel would be about aliens, whereas, his brother is about other things like what does it mean to connect with other people and like how do we give life meaning and like teen angst. So like I feel like their personalities are definitely reflected in their choice of genre.
Oh, for sure.
um,
So to change course a little bit here, he's got a little bit of a different way of telling this story, right? So in
yeah,
the first book, it's all pretty much Sev one chapter, right, from April's perspective, which I mean works great for the first book. It's
it's a
fascinating. It
first person narrative, single character, really focused on her experience from her point of view. Definitely. This one
but
doesn't
this
do that.
No, so and you're better at this than me. What would this technically be called? Because I feel like it does a couple of different things, right? We obviously switch narrative perspectives of the different characters, but we also get, um, each chapter is between each chapter is interrupted by interludes that give us like these framings of what's going on, whether that's a news article or a news report or a transcript of a YouTube
I love
video
those.
or yeah, it was really incredibly well constructed and obviously something very different than what he did before, which was like very welcome.
Yeah, definitely. So it's still a first person narrative, um, just from multiple narrators, right? Like we don't have like the omnipotent narrator, like all seeing kind of situation here. We have like here's one story told through different individual characters. It's like an ensemble cast, I would I would say, right? But he does a really nice job, I think, of creating a voice for each character, and that's something that some novelists are just not good at, right? Some people, when you read their writing, you first of all you know that it's the author, right? Their voice is distinct, but their characters' voices don't vary too differently, right? Too greatly from what the writer sort of sounds and feels like. And I think he did a nice job of not sort of falling into that trap, right? I heard him talking, I forget if it was on YouTube or on his podcast with his brother, but he was talking about how some characters were definitely easier for him to like get inside their heads, like Andy, right? He's like, he's probably the closest in like perspective and attitude and experience, right? He's like your nerdy white dude. So Hank was like, yeah, it was easy for me to get inside his character and his brain and be like, yes, here we are. Not so much with, the woman of color.
Yeah, Maya or Miranda,
Right.
people that have different experiences from him.
But he did a good job. I think that he does a good job of trying to imagine life complexly, right? Trying to imagine what it would be like. How would a person who has these different experiences come at this problem? How would they explain the situation? Which, is what a good writer does. They're able to get inside the character and make you forget that there is an author, right?
Well, then, so let's talk about those characters because they're obviously different from where we last left them. And their journeys in this book are a little different too. It's also interesting because, when you're writing a sequel, your character has to go on another journey, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we have to expose those characters again to weakness, and then they have to again fail at something and then be kind of built back up, which is something that already
Need growth.
happened
Yeah.
theoretically in the first book. They have to continue to grow. And while, obviously that happens in reality, people are sometimes narratively unsatisfied with that. Um, I was going to say, I think he does a really good job.
Yeah, I like where we sort of pick up with our characters saying, like, so the world without April, for me, turned into this, right? For Andy, it was like, I feel like I have to fill this role of being like this guy who says, like, kumbaya, let's all love each other and like be better. And I hate it, you know? Um, we have Miranda, who's like, I was really trying to get back into my science, but it was hard because I had lost my friend, and also there's aliens out there, and we're not alone, and we don't know enough about it. And for the scientific mind, I think it's hard to accept that there are some questions you're never going to have answers to, right? So, like,
Mhm.
I like where we picked up with them, not like the day after the last book ended, but a few months down the road. They've had some time to process, but they're not done, right? They are
Mhm.
grieving, and we all know that's a process that can last, and they're figuring it out, but they don't have the answers yet. I think that's a good place to pick up the story. So I think that was well done. Um, and I know that you were excited to talk about the big guy, Carl, right?
Well, so we get a lot of different perspectives from a lot of different characters, but this is the first time we get to go into the mind, as it were, of Carl, the alien, entity
Consciousness,
or intelligence, consciousness. That's what he
right?
would he would definitely say that. Yeah, he would call himself a consciousness. Um, which was, I think, fascinating for a couple of reasons. One, it obviously leans very heavily on Hank's science background. You know what I mean? There are definitely some things I was like, I'm gonna look that up after I read it. I'm like, is that the most common living microbe? I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
like what is a peligobacter? A peligobacter? Peligobacter? I'm probably saying it wrong.
Pelagibacter? I think
Oh,
it's
maybe it's a
Pelagibacter.
pelagibacter. That sounds more correct.
Pelagibacter.
But yeah.
It's a Pelagibacter. I listened to Hank did a podcast with another writer that was tied to the end of the audiobook, so I
Mhm.
grabbed that and listened to it. But yeah, Pelagibacter. So Carl, yeah, I think getting in Carl's head was really fascinating. Obviously, once we get to spend time with April for the first time, we kind of, I think we're hinted at that we're going to spend more time with Carl on this one, obviously,
Mhm.
because he's no longer the mystery, right? And, if you're going to write a sequel to the first book, obviously getting some answers to Carl would feel very satisfying. Um, so I
He's
think
the
getting
giant
to
robot
see
in the room. You can't ignore him, right? Except I thought it was interesting when we actually get to know about him. Like, I had been thinking of Carl the alien as mechanical, and this
not biological.
right, and this exposes the flaw in that thinking, that while he presented in a mechanical form, he's biology, right? He's an organism. He's something living. He's lots of living things, actually, gradually taking over lots of other living things, which is
Well,
interesting.
and it was such a fascinating idea, the
Mm-hmm.
way that Carl functioned, and then getting to go inside his head, I thought was really interesting. Mostly because I feel, there's this odd sort of dichotomy with the idea of aliens, um, species and their kind of existence if we would ever meet them. Um, kind of the scientific idea in the community is that if we were to ever go and meet an alien species coming here, it would not be for peace and prosperity and fun, because the only thing that pushes you that far away from your home in that sort of number is if you are out of resources and you need to take them. So I like that Hank's kind of way of solving that problem was to say, that Carl was programmed to be benevolent, right? But
Yeah.
then getting to see Carl as kind of this, all forgiving idea of humanity. I know the Carls in the thing compare themselves to gods, right? A good god and a bad god,
Yeah.
right? Or the forgiving God and the
Punishing,
merciful God
right?
versus Old Testament God. Um, and I think that was really interesting area to kind of a comparison. And it was an interesting level of comparison that I don't think, Hank didn't go too hard on, right? Like if he went too far into it, it would be too preachy, but I think he was just enough that it made them.
It's not like this is, Paradise Lost. We're not getting into biblical fan fiction here.
Exactly.
That's not what most readers, I think, are looking for when they pick up this kind of book. But yeah, it was really a fascinating way of thinking about what aliens might look like if they showed up and interacted with us, as opposed to if they showed up and were like, oh, great, you have the resources we need. We're going to take these. Bye. Um, you know?
Yeah. So I guess then I think that the natural transition here is to talk about the anti Carl,
Yeah.
bad Carl,
You
evil
hinted to
Carl.
that
I don't.
a minute ago, right? The less benevolent creature, being, presence,
So
whatever you want to
I
call it, his brother.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw this out here. The thing I found most fascinating about Bad Carl
Mm-hmm.
is that he's the bad guy of the book, but he's really not a strong presence in the book, if that makes any sense. He's an idea, but it's not like we ever. The book doesn't go out of its way to show the bad things that Bad Carl is doing. We just kind of get notice later
We get
that, you know,
results of his actions. We don't get to necessarily see, like, we don't see him,
we we give one thing, right? We get one big thing, and that's when um, Evil Carl takes over Miranda's body,
yeah,
right? We have one act of like true
obvious
violence.
villainy. Yeah.
Yeah, true obvious violence and hostility by act of Bad Carl. But everything else, even when he like
It's
him and
really
Carl come
subtle.
into contact, yeah, it's just and it's really fascinating. And I wonder, the book obviously works
Hmm.
by having other things to kind of put in the place of the antagonist,
Well, I feel like
but
that's what makes the antagonist effective, is it that he doesn't have to go out of his way to do evil things. He just sort of nudges people who already had the inclination to take advantage of things that, you know, he's made available, if that makes sense. Like, he doesn't need to go out there and like take over every human being. He just has to take over a couple of them and offer them tools, like Altus, right? Like the space. Um and then
or access to the dream
yeah, and
space,
then
right?
let humanity destroy itself. I think that that's a big part of sort of the message of this novel, right? That we need to do better and be better, not necessarily because there is a good god and a bad god and aliens out there trying to force us one way or the other, but because we are dangerously close to making choices that are irreversibly harmful. Um, and we should be better. Like, we can be, so why aren't we? Um,
I'm curious as to why. one of the things I'm having a difficulty putting my hand on is just why I think that that message, right, that they kind of tie up into nega Carl, anti Carl, bad Carl, I don't know, his brother.
Mm-hmm.
Um, why it works so well. So I feel like the first book um, does a very good job. Essentially, is taking Peter Petrowicki and his movement and squarely solidifying them as the antagonists, right? And then when we're not dealing with the antagonists, we got plenty of time to deal with the mystery that is Carl, right?
Yeah.
But I'm in this book, it's not as cut and dry, right? I never feel like, and we'll talk about this more with Altus, but I never feel like Altus ever, Altus feels similar to Anti-Carl in the sense that it's certainly a force working in force at times against our heroes, but it also doesn't feel like it's the antagonist. The book feels like it doesn't have like a strong antagonist. But I think it really works, but I'm surprised that it works in the absence of a large mystery.
Yeah. I think I understand what you mean by that. That we don't have the two clear sides, and we don't have the big question anymore. Once we get, halfway through, we're told what Carl is, but you still want to keep reading, and you still want to see how sort of the problem is going to resolve. And I think that's part of how it works, right? It's not the mystery, it's like the crisis that needs solving,
Hmm.
you know?
I like that. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. I also so there's a line on page 235 that Maya is like questioning like why we bother to try to fight the anti-Carl, right? Like
Hmm.
why oppose him at all if he wants to become a god, like, and let us destroy ourselves, if he's going to ultimately lead to us being peaceful, whether that's because we're all under his control or not, like, why fight it? She says, we're cruel to ourselves, to each other, to other life. We're selfish, short sighted, hateful fools. Why not just have peace? And I think that's a really interesting question the more I think about it. Like, obviously, we want to have control of our own actions and destiny and thoughts and feelings. But what is the point of us all destroying each other? You know what I mean? Like
It's
if our nature is to destroy and to hurt and to harm, like why do those in power allow that to be what happens? You know what I mean?
it's it's a piece at what cost, right?
Right.
Like it's always, and this is a big science fiction, the philosophy of science fiction is, as it were, it's a big problem that a lot of sci-fi tries to grapple with. You know, there's that magical end all be all cure to the suffering. You throw the ring into Mordor and the evil goes away. You stop the horde and things get better. You solve the problem, but at the same time, like at what cost, right? There's always a cost to it. It's that sort of, does the end justify the means scenario. If we're all walking around as zombies or people not truly in control of our own lives, you know, as
Yeah.
a
So
species, right? Free
is
will
it
is
worth
something we
uh
put.
is it worth an end to suffering if there's also no true joy, I guess, right? Because if you take away the one and the choices that we make, you know, and I think that's one of the things about like the sort of sense of numbness that people are feeling and like the loss of the dream in this book, right?
Mhm.
Like that feels like a foreshadowing, a precursor to what the anti-Carl wants the world to be like, right?
Well, and it's just, and I guess we'll transition here into talking about Altus and Peter. Um, I guess it all comes down to Altus, right? Altus being the big tool that the anti-Peter is using. This sort of full immersion VR mindscape that accesses the dream from the last book that allows people to just live out their lives in either completely virtual sandboxes where they can do whatever they want, or in, uh, basically true experiences of other people, right? And
Does sound really, really cool. Like,
I'm going to tell you, I'll be straight up front. I'd have been an Andy, mad, mad straight in this. I would be an Andy.
I
Like,
like
there's no way.
I like
But
wasn't into it until we got to the point where I guess it's Miranda's explaining the like sandbox, not the sandbox, the experiential part of it where she's like, I was learning calculus, but I wasn't learning it. Like I was experiencing someone
things,
else learning calculus and I was getting to see how their brain worked. That sounds so cool. And like from a teacher's perspective, oh my God, if I could get inside of a kid's head and see like and understand fully how like how they're processing things, that would be amazing, right?
well, it's as with, what I think this is an allegory for, it does have the ability to allow us to understand people better, right? What would be better than being able to literally experience what a minority is going through when they're walking on the street, or like you said, in education, right? A kid with dyslexia or a learning disability. Like, it's hard for, as someone with dyslexia, it's hard for me to describe to people what that actually feels like. But if they could feel it, if they could see it, if they could understand it, but Maya brings up the age old point, and this is with media consumption in general when she's talking to Andy, and I don't remember the exact quote, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially it's what's to prevent people from just intaking the same experiences they've always intook, right?
Yeah.
What's going to stop them from making their own echo chamber and just living in that, right? Particularly with the Alta space being this capitalist, um, this capitalist machine. It's not, the experiences all have to be bought by their internal money. There's no free access to it. It needs an 8K VR headset. Jesus. There's just no way that this is going to be available in lower income communities.
It's going to create
Or
new layers of exclusion. Yeah.
exactly. So assumably Altus is the big tech companies, right? Like, that's the allegory
Oh,
here,
Altus
I'm
is like
sure.
100%. It's Facebook, right? It's
It's
TikTok,
Facebook, it's
it's
Twitter,
Twitter,
TikTok,
it's YouTube, it's all of those things.
Snapchat, right?
All of those
All
things
the
that are collecting our data and trying to figure out how to sell us.
But I don't think it's just that. I think there's an allusion here to how powerful those companies have become and our place in their inhabitants as inhabitants of it. Uh, I reference
Digital
almost the
citizens?
situation exactly as digital citizens of that space, and I think the allegory is there with Valverde. So Peter essentially, Altus exists on Valverde, but it's so independent by having its own monetary system, by having its own citizens and its own this and its own that. Like, it's essentially not untouchable by governments, but
Well, also
the government.
selecting Valverde as the place to be, like
Well, it's not a
it's a
place
strategic
that's going
choice.
to.
Obviously,
Yeah,
like that government is not going to try to control Altus. It's been bought. It's been paid off.
well, but it's even harder though, because even with the existence of something like Bitcoin, right, or them using
Mhm.
their own monetary system, that's not actually something that states have been able to stop,
And how do
right?
you tax
They don't like
a
it.
digital currency, right? How does a state get to take part of that revenue and turn it back to doing the good things that companies don't necessarily do of their own volition, right? There's really important functions of private capital, and there's really important functions of government. And when private capital finds a way to cut government out entirely, I think it creates a whole host of problems. You know what I mean?
It's dangerous, right? And obviously, Altus is dangerous, and like I said, I would have been an Andy so square nose on the head. Like I would mourn the loss of this incredible technology, but I think April says it, and Andy in her last conversation, like it's not that Altus and access to the dream again was bad. It was that the how much that power had condensed, right? And how much control lied now in Altus's hands, from economic power to social to, you know, all of that. It just made them dangerous. The same sort of dangerous that, Facebook and Twitter and all those things are, in ways that they give examples of in this book, right? Whether that's the thread, right, being this sort of anonymous collective.
I thought that was an interesting concept too, that idea
I,
of the thread. As,
it's a super interesting concept.
and I mean, we're used to influencers, right? Individuals who gather a following and share their views and make you want to buy their shampoo and whatever. But the idea of an anonymous influencer and a collective, right? A collective of experts who are trying to sway public opinion, like that's really interesting to me. It's almost like if you took the idea of like a think tank and made it like shiny social media, you know?
Yeah, I don't think the collective part's the far-fetched part
No.
here. Or not far-fetched, but I don't think the collective part is the difficult part, right? Most YouTubes now are created by
Yeah.
teams, right? Even if the personality is a personality, right? They've got writers and
Behind the
teams that are
scenes help
exactly
for
helping them
sure.
make it work. But yeah, it's the anonymous bit that I
And it's
find
the policy
fascinating
driven
for
bit,
sure.
right? This is not a collective that was created to entertain or
Right, they're not making fun cat
right.
videos.
They're trying to make you follow a certain line of thinking and, vote a certain way and spend your money a certain way, to support certain causes or not. And that's what I think is interesting, because I think there's a lot on social media currently and on the internet at large that is trying to push people, trying to nudge people one way or the other. And there are some sort of more honest ways of nudging people. And then there's like, Russian meddling in US elections trying to push
Well,
people.
which the book touches on, right?
Yeah.
April, well, first off, obviously, Bad Carl, right, exists as just straight up a lot of those,
Negative influences.
influences people, yeah, just kind of repeating themselves and retweeting and sharing,
Bots,
yada, yada,
man.
yada. But, that includes April and Maya, right, who strategically organize a lot of people, right, and essentially weaponize them. They don't, obviously for good and not,
They created a movement, right?
and not well, yes, but when that's the thing, right? When you create a movement and say, move here,
Well, it
right?
makes you
It
sort of
doesn't.
question, like, what is the difference between a movement and, um, you know, malicious foreign interference, right? Like,
Well, the malicious foreign interference isn't made up by people in that community who are affected by the thing the movement bothers and are impassioned, right? Like
exactly. So
it's the people, obviously.
who is it that is trying to create the thing? But the thing that's interesting is if you follow the bots, ultimately you do end up with like the MAGA red hat culture. Like there are real people, obviously, who are now espousing the views that were originally being put forth by bots. You know what I mean? Like, I know this is like a super political way to look at the thing and talk about the thing, but things that start out as a genuine movement can then get, sold out, bought up, and twisted to suit the needs of corporations, governments, whatever. I keep thinking about the way that like products get greenwashed, like, oh, all our bottles are now 100% recyclable, but then they don't mention that like their factory is still wasting gallons and gallons of water every year. Things like that.
Yeah, well, it sounds nice, but it's not doing anything meaningful. It's just, yeah.
Right. So like even if it feels like it's just important to know your sources, right? And to be able to find, what is the true power behind this? Is it people? Is it genuinely members of a community working towards a common goal? Or is there money at play,
Right. Well, and that, money at play brings us back to Altus. Obviously,
Yeah.
Altus's driving factor is money
Profit.
and, profit at all costs without even any knowledge of how their product works or if it's safe.
Oh my God. It's so mind-boggling to me, the arrogance displayed, that they're like, yeah, no, it's cool, we have the technology, so we're gonna make money off of it. Does it matter if it's safe? you know like, obviously it matters to a lot of people, but not the ones in charge.
It's funny because in this book I feel like Miranda, right? Like I never find Peter uh, scary, right? He's not menacing in the way that he is in the last book, sort of as an antagonist. I pity him. I do. Like he's just so caught up
You
in
sad,
this thing.
strange little man, right?
Yeah. He's just so caught up in this, and when you finally obviously get to the point where he's like, it's that whole principled thing, like obviously Peter's movement in the first book being similar to the Make America Great Again sort of, this sort of extremist left right sort of thing.
Yeah.
And like, but at least that Peter, or the essence of that idea of Peter seemed like, well, at least he had something he
He seemed to have
believed in.
principles, right? He seemed to have
But
something that he was fighting for, that he really truly believed in, that he felt was worth going out and getting followers for.
right, and at the base of that, and this is
You can
a book
respect that,
one
even if you
question,
disagree with it.
particularly if the thing is like, hey, maybe extraterrestrial intelligence from another Earth, not necessarily our friend. It's kind of a reasonable argument. I won't lie,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, the way he achieves power through that by peddling fear is a problem, but to just
He does
he
have a
just sells
legitimate
it.
point, right?
He just sells it, all of it. He takes his legitimate point and he throws it in the garbage and says, "Give me money."
Yeah. And that's the thing that Andy is struggling with in the beginning of the book, which is why I think it's really interesting to sort of look at those two characters in opposition, where Andy's like, it would be so easy to sell out, right?
Right. I mean,
I
particularly at
could
that point.
leverage I could leverage my followers into a lot of money if I wanted to, but I feel like that's not the right thing to do.
Well, and
And I know that it's not the right thing to do. Where
and then Andy's ability.
no, give me that money.
Well, and even Andy later on in the book, right?
Yeah.
He's like, God, I feel so free just knowing that this is just how I need to use people, and I don't have to weigh every decision and thought I make with who's going to think about it, and is it going to be on brand? Is it going to be at message? Is it going to make people feel good?
Yeah.
When he can just let loose and go, F- you, Sorry, I'll bleep that.
Yeah, he And I mean, that's part, I think, of the pressure of being a public facing individual, right? Like, I do not envy our celebrities, our personalities, our politicians, even who, you know, can't have a bad day in public because it won't be on brand, you know?
Yeah.
That's got to be a really hard way to live. And I think there's a lot to be said for the way that this book and the first one examine sort of those questions of like what do we do to people when we make them celebrities, right? Like,
Well, and celebrities now, there's nowhere to hide.
yeah.
There's nowhere to run. We're always on. We're always performing. We're always presenting. It's exhausting.
And there are so many more venues you're expected to present yourself on, right? Like your olden days celebrities had to worry about the media and the paparazzi, right? Whatever, fine. In theory, you could escape that. But like you're your own paparazzi now. Like you're expected to be on Instagram and on Twitter and, making content and generating views even when you're on vacation. Like even when your show is on hiatus, like you're supposed to be engaged.
You need to keep them interested so they'll come back. And that's part of your deal.
Which, like, oof, that sounds exhausting.
It does sound exhausting.
And like,
So,
obviously there are rewards, but
fame,
you
fortune,
know.
riches, private islands. No. So, to wrap up, one last question. Do you think do you think we needed this? The sequel? This is clearly the end of this story,
Yeah,
right?
I'm
He
not
makes a very,
here for sure.
you know, I know for me, after the first book, obviously there was more, since we were hearing it from April's perspective, it was likely that she was not dead.
Yeah.
It would make writing a book very difficult. Um, but I don't know. I felt like the first book ended so well. I didn't think
Yeah,
we'd get a follow up so soon.
right up until, the very end, the knock knock or whatever it was at the very, very like last paragraph of the first book. Um, Up until that point, I was like, okay, so this is where the story ends. You have made your point, right? Like, I get the message of this novel. I get the ideas that I should be thinking about, and I liked it. I was into it. I didn't feel like I needed a sequel until it was like, wait a minute, but little cliffhanger here. And then I was like, oh, but there's more. And then it was like, yeah, actually, I would love to know what is the deal with the samurai robots,
I forgot that the samurai robots were also a thing in this story, not just a vehicle to talk about us.
Yeah. So, like, I don't know that this was, like, strictly speaking necessary, but it was definitely a good read. And it was definitely something that helped me to think a little bit about the current situation that we're in. And anything that helps you to process the experiences you're living through is a good thing, I think, right now, especially when it's so difficult to like wrap your mind around things, to sort of break it into the component parts, the questions of humanity being presented to you through the vehicle of aliens and social media. Uh, yeah, I'm glad that this book exists.
All right. So just to end, do you have any like favorite musings from the book? Just little things.
I don't know if I have favorite like musings, but I was entertained at the way that Carl shifted from being a samurai robot to being a little furry monkey. That was
I did like that.
that was cute. I liked that, and that again, helped me make the shift from thinking of Carl as technology to thinking of Carl as biology.
For sure. That was a great way of doing that. Also, it makes him more relatable,
Mhm.
right? Like he no longer feels like this ominous thing if he's not this big ominous thing. If he's
Exactly.
like, oh, the little monkey with the watch around his neck.
Yeah.
Uh, I think I really liked the concept of the Book of Good Times,
Yes, that was fun.
and the introduction of Bex as a new character. I really enjoyed.
Yeah, Bex is pretty cool.
We didn't talk about much about Bex, but yeah, I liked the whole Bex Andy Book of Good Times. I thought that was all really well done.
I agree. Yeah, the way that we think about things as being either technology or biology, I think sometimes we think about ourselves that way too. Um, Carl is us. I'm not just the thoughts my brain has, I am also the body it inhabits, you know? So it's nice to be reminded of that every once in a while.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much for joining us on another edition of the Non-Pro Show. If you guys are interested, obviously pick up the book, check it out. Even we didn't spoil everything. There's still a ton more in there if you haven't read it and you just listen to this. Otherwise, make sure you give us a like, a subscription, a follow. Make sure you rate us on your favorite podcatcher app with a glowing review. We accept no subpar reviews. Make sure you follow us for more content. I'm sure we'll be doing more of this stuff soon.
Yeah.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
This has been a non-productive media presentation. Executive producer Frank Hablawi. This program and many others like it on the Non-Productive Network is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Please share it, but ask before trying to change it or sell it. For more information, visit non-productive.com.